People's Tribunal on Economic Crime has delivered its final findings to the public at Constitution Hill in Johannesburg. This follows 6 months in which implicated parties in business and government were allowed to respond to economic crime allegations. Legal arguments were also prepared for deliberation by members of the tribunal. Legal researcher Khuraisha Patel joins me now to tell us a bit more about what has come out of this final report. So you delivered this initial report, I think it was in February thereabout, and you were going to give various implicated parties time to respond to what was initially said by this panel of 5 that you had appointed. Did that happen? And give us a sense of the broad findings that you have now revealed in your final report.
Thank you. So yes, we sent notice, the Organising Committee of the People's Tribunal, we sent notice to around 32 implicated parties, both foreign governments, domestic state actors, as well as non-state actors, organizations and companies in jurisdictions such as Belgium, France, the US, for their role throughout 1997 through 1977, I beg your pardon, all the way through state capture today, on their role in economic crime during apartheid, all the way to contemporary allegations of state capture. This was done within 3 months, and after we received their response, which was actually only one response that was received from a bank in Belgium, we proceeded to deliberate with the panel in order to arrive at the final findings that we disclosed to the public today. So
you're telling me only one bank in Belgium bothered to respond. Did institutions such as Tribunal, who are not even abroad in any other country, they're here in South Africa, did you get any joy from them?
No joy. We did receive a few acknowledgements from other parties that were implicated. However, the only substantive response came from one party, which really indicates their aptitude in this entire process and their will to be held accountable.
So having seen that reluctance and perhaps non-response on their part, what findings did you then issue against? Initially, I remember in your preliminary report, you were talking about institutions such as Credit Bank, I think it's called, and the French government, and the role that you were saying they played in propping up the apartheid state through various activities that led to the busting of sanctions, UN sanctions on South Africa back then. Because in your view, that's not really unrelated to what we see today in as far as corruption and state capture is concerned. So what findings have you made then against some of these entities?
We've received very positive findings from our panel members that really aim to show the continuities between the crimes that were committed during apartheid all the way through the 1999 arms deal and to contemporary state capture today, showing that they're not isolated incidents. Some of the findings that we've had that are very positive is, like you mentioned, findings against the French government and Credit Bank specifically, which calls for the National Director of Public Prosecutions to establish a special prosecutorial and investigating team within the NPA to investigate and prosecute state and non-state actors for any conduct that they may have committed that contributed to apartheid, and further for any conduct committed by state actors during this time to be provided to the United Nations and appropriate international bodies to allow for their prosecutions. And one of the most encouraging findings and recommendations that does come from the People's Tribunal panel is that should these domestic courts and international courts not be willing or able to look into this and investigate this evidence, that the UN be engaged in order to set up a separate and independent international criminal tribunal to investigate the human rights violations, the gross human rights violations that were committed during apartheid, which was a crime against humanity.
What about individuals, right? I mean, if we talk about the sanctions busting, there were people who were almost operatives in playing that space of busting sanctions on apartheid South Africa, and they probably made a good deal of fortune from doing that. But also, when you come to the arms deal, which you also link as well to the previous economic crimes and also the current economic crimes, there were people who were sort of the go-between people and sort of the facilitators that also benefited, and then you come down to the current issues of state capture. Are you making any particular findings against any particular individuals? I suppose you can say this because you did give them the right to be heard, and they didn't use it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed. So the findings of the tribunal indicates a litany of former and current members of government, particularly in relation to the arms deal, who were named in those papers and who are currently standing trial as well for their role during the arms deal, and indeed some members, for example, the Gupta family, for their role in the whole Tribunal saga in state capture at the moment, to evidence these continuities and to indicate that they should not be precluded from investigation and prosecution by the South African Police Services as well as the Hawks. And this also stretches back to crimes that were committed by individuals and so-called middlemen during the apartheid era for their role in facilitating these arms trades and sanctions busting, as we call it, in order to ensure that they're also held accountable irrespective of when these crimes were committed. It's not a historic crime. These matters are still pertinent today and there are continuities, which is why you cannot consider those crimes that were committed in apartheid as something that is historic and can no longer be looked at. We have systems of structural inequality that persist today that really find their genesis in apartheid and before that, which is why they need to be looked at today.
So quickly then, Khuraisha Patel, talk to me about how the work you have done relates to the work that Justice Raymond Zondo is currently doing around the issue of state capture. For instance, is his scope broad enough in your view, and how can your work enhance his holistic view of state capture?
One of the findings of the panel was really to show the symbiotic relationship that these two processes could have and how the People's Tribunal could really feed into the Zondo Commission and the nature of evidence that they hear. And one of the strongest recommendations, again, that were made was that the People's Tribunal evidence be submitted to the Zondo Commission all the time from apartheid era to contemporary allegations of state capture to show this continuity and to show that the individuals who were out there back then are possibly still working here. So the mandate of the tribunal now would be really to support the Zondo Commission in as far as it can in providing legal submissions, providing evidence, and any assistance that the Zondo Commission would seem fit for civil society organizations like our organizing committee to really support this process and ensure that justice can be accessed in just this way as well.
All right, thank you so much. Khuraisha Patel is a legal researcher and she's been talking to us about the issue, the final report of the People's Tribunal on economic crimes and just outlining some of their main findings.